Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Max Verstappen wins the Austrian Grand Prix for his 5th victory in a row and Red Bull's 20th win in the last 21 races. But Mercedes today frankly embarrassed by not just one, but two customer teams, beaten by Norris's McLaren and Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin. What went on with Mercedes' pace today? Hamilton and Toto Wolff not at all happy about it. They have some big questions to answer for themselves over the coming days. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. Firstly, I thought some actual good news of the day was the Austrian Grand Prix locked in until 2030, an actual proper racing track in a beautiful location, and they're extending the deal for quite some time to come. So pretty cool stuff, I think, in general, just given all the other circuits that are getting the mega deals that maybe shouldn't be. I thought it was nice to see an actual good, proper racing track. And here we go. Going into turn one, Hamilton got a great start again up on Norris immediately, and you'd have thought that was, because it seemed before the race that Hamilton was potentially going to be able to challenge for a podium here, right? There was a question to me as, okay, Hamilton, he's in a good position in the Mercedes. If he can clear Norris quite quickly, he should be able to challenge the Ferraris for a podium, with Verstappen probably driving off into the distance. That was a very different story to what happened in the race, right? And also you guys can see in the background Yuki Tsunoda going for a mega send into turn one. It was like 3 or 4 wide there. Tsunoda got some wing damage in the end, actually. And it was kind of funny from Tsunoda because he got the wing damage and then he completely sent it past Perez. Like, he overtook Perez with wing damage, but then going down into turn 4, and there's always some sort of instance here at turn 4, manages to just outbrake himself with no front downforce, has to come into the pits. There was a safety car actually because of this instant in turn 1 when Tsunoda goes for a bit of an optimistic dive bomb, hits the rear of the Alpine, breaks his front wing, and they had to clear this stuff up as Perez goes off the track here. So an absolute mess at turn 1, as you might expect. But at the front of the race, after Verstappen was away and gone, and it was quite clear from probably lap 1 when Verstappen had like a 1 second gap immediately that the race was pretty much over there. But I think Sainz here got, look, Leclerc got P2 and a good day from Ferrari for sure. They were quicker than the Astons, much quicker than the Mercedes, but I feel like Sainz was hard done by here because he had pace all weekend long. He was good in quali. Leclerc was slightly quicker in quali, but he was, I think, faster in the race than Leclerc was. You never really know because when you're in the DRS, you're always getting dragged along a little bit, right, as Sainz was. But I think if they let him go, he might have had more pace here than Leclerc did. And by staying behind Leclerc, Leclerc was driving back from Verstappen. Ferrari said, no guys, stay in position, just preserve your tyres and all this stuff. And, Carlos was on the radio like, okay, you sure guys? I guess if I have to stay behind Leclerc, then I will. And then we got this right. So already lap 12, Hamilton was all over the track limit. And it was quite clear that his car wasn't performing the way he wanted it to. He was trying to extract the lap time by, mounting the curbs. And Norris was behind him taking notes on all the times that he'd gone off the track. And by turn, pretty much lap 12, he already had a black and white flag, which meant one more violation and, you're done, right? You get a 5-second penalty, which is exactly what happened. It then happened to Tsunoda, to Gasly, to Sargent, to basically half the drivers on the grid, to be honest. And fair enough. I mean, the stewards are just doing their jobs. But it can be a little bit tricky to say how often they're applying this correctly. But Norris was right on his back, and it was quite clear the McLaren had pace and the Mercedes didn't. And they were talking about brake issues earlier on for Hamilton. I'm not really sure that, he did lock up a couple of times, even coming into the pits. I just think the balance of the car didn't really seem to be there. It seemed to be a real handful to drive. And that's the thing with the Red Bull, that it doesn't matter what circuit you're on, doesn't matter what the track conditions are, wet or dry, doesn't matter what temperature it is, doesn't matter what tyre compounds are being used, the Red Bull is the fastest car. Everywhere it's the fastest. It's actually remarkable, to be honest. So anyway, at this point, Hamilton already got a black and white flag. Sainz was right on the back of Leclerc. Perez was making some progress already here through the field. And then we got this. So, virtual safety car comes out because Hülkenberg out of the race and engine failure. An actual, can you believe it, a reliability problem in Formula 1 at the moment because they don't really happen all that often at the moment, let's be honest. So then it was a tricky one for Ferrari. Verstappen was already past the pit entry, as was Leclerc. Sainz probably, potentially, if he was the quickest reaction time in the world, could have pitted. But realistically, there was not quite enough time for Ferrari to react and pit under the VSC. Hamilton did, Norris did. pretty much all the teams did. But it was still under VSC conditions the next lap, and that's fine. You can still pit and gain the same benefit if it's still a VSC. So Ferrari did with Leclerc, but they also decided to pit Sainz as well. And this, I think, was their error, really, because they had a slow stop with Leclerc, then they had another slow stop with Sainz. He got stuck behind Leclerc anyway coming into the pit, and then Charles had a slow stop, and then they had a slow stop for Sainz as well. So I think really the play from Ferrari probably was to leave Sainz out, because Verstappen, they'd left him out, and Red Bull, their strategy is usually pretty good. So if you're Ferrari, you're thinking, all right, maybe we should split the strategies here. And yes, by pitting under the VSC, they did end up double jumping Verstappen when he eventually pitted. But realistically, it wasn't going to make much difference, right? So I think they should have left Sainz out here, because at least he could have got to show his pace in clean air. And probably feeling like he had to make up for that, he then ventured outside of track limits, as did many others. Hamilton, lap 17, already had a 5-second penalty of a track limits. So, it's what happens around Austria, but it's still crazy to get one that early. And then he had to be very careful, because any more violations, it's a 10-second penalty you get, which is what happened to Tsunoda. He got a 5 seconds, and then his next, violation, he got a 10-second for it. So Hamilton then had to be really careful. And, then he was going full snitch mode as well. So after Norris had snitched on him, he was then trying to chase Perez and almost got past Perez, just didn't have the traction. I mentioned this even before the weekend, that the traction out of turn 3, that's such a critical area where Mercedes, their car's just going to struggle there. And even with the better line, even with the switchback, even with the DRS, Hamilton just couldn't get enough power down to get past the Red Bull. So he was then trying to get Perez given a penalty. So you know how it goes with these drivers, right? They try and do their best. And then, can you believe it, Verstappen pitted and Leclerc took the lead of the race. So officially, Verstappen's streak of laps led ended at something like 239 or 245. He got past Mansell's record, and he now sits at third all time at most laps led, behind, I think, Senna, and then Alberto Ascari led the most. But Ferrari led the race for 10 laps, which I think is one of their longest streaks, or potentially their longest streak of leading a race since Monza last year. So that just goes to show how bad it's been for pretty much everybody else. Verstappen quite quickly dispatched of Carlos Sainz, and this is the difference, right, at times between, I know at this point Verstappen's tyre delta compared to Sainz's was bigger than it was when Perez fought against Sainz later on in the race. But Verstappen's racecraft is just really clean compared to Perez's, and I think you see that when Perez fights his way through the fields, especially towards the end. So Sainz got a 5-second penalty, and this was kind of the dagger for him, because Perez was fighting through a long way back at this point, but Perez had a lot of pace towards the end of the race, and Sainz with the 5-second penalty, and it doesn't just cost you 5 seconds, it seems to cost you more than that, because you're stuck there for 5 seconds, then they start work on the car, it really costs you like 7-8 seconds really. Hamilton then got overtaken by Norris on track. The McLaren was just straight up faster than the Mercedes here, which is embarrassing for Mercedes, and then Hamilton was trying to get Norris a penalty, but he did well to keep it within the track limits. And then Ferrari came on the radio asking Leclerc to do a 3-stop. I don't understand why. Like, why do Ferrari ask their drivers this? They're the ones that have to make the decision. What do you think about 3 stops? Deg is higher than expected. Leclerc's like, no, what are you talking about? The 2-stop will be fine, even if Deg is higher than expected, which obviously makes sense. The only one that can do a 3-stop is Max Verstappen, and we'll get into that. So Verstappen ends up taking the lead. He takes down Leclerc. Big tyre delta at this point, an advantage for him. And as Luke Smith says, that 10-lap stint at the front was Ferrari's longest stint at the front of a Grand Prix since Monza last year. So that goes to show something for sure. But Hamilton was not happy. I mean, he was talking all the time about anyone got penalties ahead. Toto was trying to calm him down on the radio. I think Hamilton was just getting frustrated with the fact that the car just was not performing at all how they expected it to be. Perez made some progress through the field here as well. And then we had Sainz get past Norris. Honestly, Norris just drove such a phenomenal race today. Piastri had an unfortunate incident at the start. He was quite a way back. But yeah, Norris around this track in general is fantastic. And that McLaren looks a lot better. But Mercedes should still be faster than McLaren, no doubt. And as Toto came on the radio again to Hamilton and saying, look, Lewis, the car is bad, we know. Please just drive it and keep it within the limits. And this has been a quote that's going around some time, because this feels a lot like last year, right? The W14 was meant to be better than the W13. But last year, there were plenty of races where he would be on the radio saying, oh, Hamilton, like, sorry, the car's terrible and all this. And I mean, yeah, he's on the radio saying it again. Eventually, Perez gets past Norris as well. Some good battling there. And then there was a great battle between Sainz and Perez Perez. And this shows where, like, you know, Perez just isn't, in terms of racecraft, as clean as Verstappen is. He was doing all these like fake moves, and basically Sainz was like, he's being intimidating, as in he's trying to fake a move to one side or another and then not actually going to commit at it, and he reckons that Stewart should have a look at it. But eventually Perez figured out that the plan is to not get ahead going into turn 3 so you can get the DRS on the run down to turn 4. He eventually figured it out. And then to me, what was probably the most comedic moment of the race was Max Verstappen leading by roughly 24 seconds after, you know, Leclerc had fallen back, and he was just doing tyre preservation to ensure that he could stave off any potential Perez fight at the ends. But Sainz had held up Perez long enough that wasn't going to be a problem. So Verstappen had just enough gap to pit for soft tyres and go for the fastest lap. The funny thing about this is, right, that his teammate Perez had it. So it's already a maximum point score for Red Bull. Verstappen's already leading the Drivers' Championship by, like, you know, 1,000,000 points at this point. And he still comes into the pits here, chucks on the soft tyres just to take the point off Perez. Like, it's monster mentality from Red Bull and from Verstappen. And, you know, he wanted the clean sweep of all, you know, pole position, fastest lap, like winning the sprint and all this stuff over the weekend. He wanted the clean sweep, and that's what he achieved. But the manner in which he achieved it, like, if I'm Leclerc as well, and I'm seeing this guy come out of the pits in front of me with an absolute rocket ship, spending his entire outlap warming up the tyres to prep it for his fastest lap attempt, which he gets. It's like, he was just, honestly, this is just taking the mick as far as I'm concerned from Red Bull. But yeah, it just shows what a team and what a driver that Verstappen-Red Bull combination is. So he wins at Austria again, I think his 5th victory at the circuit. Leclerc holds on for seconds, only 5 seconds down, but realistically it's more like 25 when you take into account the pit stop. Perez recovers back for 3rd. If Sainz didn't have the 5-second penalty, he probably holds on for the final podium spot. Then Norris, Alonso had a very anonymous race here, but he was good enough for P6. Then the 2 Mercedes, then Gasly, then Stroll, and look at that, 39 seconds behind the leader Hamilton was, and it would have been basically a minute had Verstappen not pitted, which makes this Mercedes' worst race of the season. As Bottas is on the radio, that's P7, you know, persevering, terrible balance at the start of the race. And I mean, yeah, it was frankly embarrassing, right? I mean, Toto Wolff has to sit there and think about, because their pace on Friday was pretty competitive, right? In practice, it was pretty good. And they were slower in the race today than they were in Friday practice, which doesn't really make that much sense. They'll have to figure out either what they changed, or it just didn't seem like the car was going to suit this track particularly well anyway, at least compared to a circuit like Barcelona. But it was quite good in Canada, should have been good here. So it's difficult to say why Mercedes' pace wasn't there, whether it was a setup thing. I know that there were some issues that they might have been struggling with, but Hamilton's like, look, I was so slow, I was going backwards, and says that I was just frustrated with the car, not so much the penalties, and, you know, the frustration with the car was kind of boiling over to the other elements, and even says that, yeah, the car just wasn't really a massive surprise how it felt. So he had a tough sprint race, and then he comes in here and has a pretty terrible race as well, at least by Mercedes standards. Their worst of the season, it's got to be said. But looking on the other side of things, Red Bull had another absolutely domineering performance, especially in the hands of Max Verstappen, obviously, but even Perez on a difficult weekend where he said he was unwell and felt pretty bad the entire weekend with his questionable racecraft, got from P15 to P3 without that much difficulty. They've won 20 of the last 21 Grand Prix, and there is now a serious question as to whether, compared to the rivals, this is the most dominant Formula 1 car ever created. The gap over the next best car in each race looks like this. This race, it was technically 5 seconds, but would have been something like 25 seconds. Only Australia with the safety car finish, and Canada was the biggest outlier. But apart from that, the gaps have been pretty much on par with Mercedes 2014, and winning every single race this year is most certainly still on the cards. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.